Okay, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar today with Revida Labs. Matthew will be presenting for us. I can tell you that this product, while it is new to us, as I have learned more and more about it, it has been life-changing, and I think that you will find that it's going to be extremely effective for your patients to be used for both pain management and also antiviral, among other things. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hand it over to Matthew and let him present. And then at the end, we will have some questions. Take it away, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here today. As Amanda was saying, we're Revida Labs. We are a hemp-derived CBD and cannabinoid therapy company. Joining me today is Trey Reckling. He's the founder and director of the Academy of Cannabis Sciences and also works on our education support team. And Mary Brown, our chief clinical officer, having some technical difficulties, but hopefully will be joining us at some point throughout the talk. What really sets Revida apart is our team, is the team that backs our product. Our product is of the highest possible quality, and that's really because everyone that has come together to make this happen. The doctors at the amazing Ames Institute, along with Mary Brown, really weren't seeing the products that they needed for their patients on the market. So they teamed up with Revida Labs, Canvas Therapeutics, and everybody has just been working diligently to create the cleanest, highest possible quality, and really one of the more affordable cannabinoid wellness products available on the market today. Everything that we do is data driven. Everything is what has been seen in the clinics, what is real life testimony along with the science and the data, to make sure that we are at the cutting edge of what's happening in cannabinoid therapy today. So our mission to help people and their loved ones access safe, effective, physician-formulated cannabinoids, and again, provide expert education that they can trust and understand. It's one thing to go to Whole Foods and see a cannabinoid product on the market, but how to use that, when to use that, has that product been tested for potency, for heavy metals, for purity? That is really what I believe sets us apart.
And there's a lot of noise in the market, and when you can buy a CBD product at the gas station,
right.
You realize that some consumers just are not informed. So that's another reason it makes sense to work with a company that has physician formulated and purity testing.
Absolutely. Education, again, that's one of the things that really sets us apart. Trey and I, education is our primary focus. So anytime a patient, anybody has a question, we are always here to answer it. And if we can't answer it, we have a whole medical advisory board behind us that can help us to dive deep and understand the answers to these questions. Today, we're going to focus briefly on a little bit of the legality and history of the use of cannabinoids. But primarily, we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system and how and why these compounds seem to be so effective. One of the major challenges in the market today is really the lack of knowledge and the lack of research. We'll delve into this a little bit more in a minute, but the endocannabinoid system was discovered within the last 25, 30 years. It's still not something that's really discussed in medical schools. So there's this major system of the body that's responsible for a host of different things that again, doctors aren't yet learning about. We're very lucky to work with a team of doctors that are passionate about the research and the data and the science to really start bridging that gap. But again, this is something that we are really at the forefront of. Stigma is, of course, another thing. this is something, plants and products that have been demonized for decades, and for a lot of people their entire life. So again, some science and data that has really changed in the last 20, 30 years. We're really trying to educate as to why, this isn't reefer madness and that scary thing that we've been told for so long. This is really a medicinal plant. Um, and that really, up until a few years ago, the CBD that was available on the market, in the hemp market, really was a very low quality. So this is something that before 2018 was a very different landscape. It was off the hemp-derived CBD was often coming from overseas, where often hemp was grown to remediate mines, in which case it would pull up a lot of heavy metals and produce very low quantities of CBD. So when you were getting CBD from hemp before 2018, there was a chance that it was a very low quality and had very high in contaminants, where today, after the 2018 Farm Bill, which states as long as the hemp is lower than 0.3% THC, it can be grown in the United States. So there is now very high quality hemp being produced for its cannabinoid content. And that's really what we use, what we've searched for, the partnerships that we found to make sure, again, that we are using the highest quality product available.
And just to emphasize that point Matthew made about soil remediation, that's one of the fantastic qualities of hemp and the cannabis plant is to be able to clean soil, basically, because it pulls everything from the soil. But if one of those things is heavy metals or pesticides that are used, all that goes in as well. And then when you extract, you condense that the percentage that's in the plant. So just another reason to always be aware and make sure that you can not just trust but verify that the product you're getting is a clean one.
Absolutely. So what we're doing is not new. We're rediscovering ancient methods, ancient techniques. The first documented use of cannabis as a medicine is almost 5,000 years old in Chinese medical texts. But up until the early 1900s, cannabis was one of the most commonly prescribed things in a pharmacy. Much like we use it for today, it was used for pain, sleep, anxiety. After the Civil War, it was used for dysentery. Queen Victoria's personal physician, after a trip to India, recommended it for menstrual cramps. It was really around the early 1800s or early 1900s where the laws started changing. I don't want to get too into that because I can spend the whole hour on that and get really fired up. But there were some financial interests and governmental interests in the end of alcohol prohibition that kind of all led to this policy change. And everybody was used to getting their cannabis tincture, and all of a sudden they started hearing about the dangers of smoking marijuana. And it was really, it was a very successful PR campaign, albeit a very negative and terrible one, where all of a sudden marijuana was made illegal and people couldn't get their cannabinoid medicines anymore. Much to the doctors associations were very against that rule change, and fought really hard against it until 1944, I believe it was taken out of the US Pharmacopoeia. Even though during World War II, hemp was encouraged to be grown in victory gardens. So there is this very convoluted history where on one hand you have the US government owning the patent for cannabinoid therapies while telling people that cannabis is this evil, dangerous thing. One of the things that people talk about is that there's not enough research on cannabis. That's simply not true. Cannabis is one of the most studied plants on the planet. There are a multitude of studies from around the world on PubMed and available for research. And that research is continuing and getting better as the laws are changing. A thing that I will kind of talk about with this is that in the United States, a lot of the studies that are done are less than ideal, as they're done through NIDA, which is the Council on Drug Abuse. And they really dictate who's allowed to study cannabis. And the cannabis, if you are able to do a study through NIDA, you're getting cannabis that was grown at the University of Mississippi, which is generally regarded as being at such low quality that it's not indicative of what's available to the general population in the market. So the studies that are being done on the US, if a researcher is able to do it, the material that they're testing isn't indicative of what you could get in, especially here in Washington, in a cannabis dispensary.
And fortunately, that's changing. The government will
Absolutely.
be allowing additional licenses. So, in fact, the government was sued for low quality. Sue Sisley out of Arizona was doing studies on PTSD and said, look, I can't work with this. This is simply, this is not indicative, doesn't represent what's available, like Matt said. So, so that's good that we're kind of, all of us, on the cusp of great changes happening and rediscovery of this medicine.
Absolutely. One of the pioneers and godfathers of what we do today is Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. If Mary were on, she has a really great story of when she actually got to meet him, which we are all very jealous of. But his lab in Israel for the last 50 or 60 years has really been leading research into cannabinoids. He synthesized, or he isolated THC, as long as many other cannabinoids. And then his team was very instrumental in discovering the endocannabinoid system and essentially working backwards, figuring out why these compounds have such a profound effect throughout our body, and then finding this whole receptor system, one of the most abundant receptor systems throughout the body. Sorry. One of the most abundant receptor systems throughout the body, that's primarily responsible for regulating cellular communication. We'll dive much deeper into that coming up here. As Amanda was saying, when she used our products, self-reported studies are showing that people are getting very significant and substantial improvement in function and how their body is working, and with sleep, fatigue, anxiety, nausea, pain relief, quality of life. And that's because the endocannabinoid system is so intrinsically linked to every other system in our body. Essentially, anytime that there is a system that is overstimulated or understimulated, it's the endocannabinoid system's job to bring that system back to homeostasis, to bring it back to balance. So a lot of people will talk about cannabis as this panacea. It does everything. Really, it just does one thing, but that one thing is very important to pain, anxiety, inflammation, insomnia, nausea, vomiting, cognition, and lucidity. Again, anytime that there's inflammation throughout the body, an overproduction of a neurotransmitter, it's the endocannabinoid system's job to regulate that. Oftentimes, due to biology, genetics, trauma, diet, for whatever reason, sometimes our body just can't produce enough of these compounds. And that's when supplementing with these plant compounds can be really beneficial and effective. And again, I'll dive a little more deeper into that.
And on the inflammation front, on inflammation alone, CBD has been shown to be up to 25 times more effective than aspirin for inflammation, or standard NSAID medicine. And any research you can, anybody who's looked into NSAID medicine a little bit knows that that could just be dangerous, you know, for your heart, for your liver, for a number of things. So, and we all know how inflammation plays related to pain and so many other conditions. So just to be able to bring the inflammation response in our body down is tremendous. If it only did that, it would be wonderful, but it does so much more.
Absolutely. Thank you. And exactly. This is, I personally, I have herniated discs in my back, and over 10 years ago, was started on a traditional pain management route. Um, did not work well for me. Uh, but for the last 10 years, I have used cannabis exclusively for pain, anxiety, sleep issues, without having to go back to the pharmaceutical route.
Me too, Matthew. And I'm so glad. And it sounds like a commercial, right? But I don't take traditional pharmaceuticals anymore for anxiety or for pain. And I also have a recurring back injury that the doctors were happy to give me more, Scalaxin and Flexeril and a host of opioids that they would re-prescribe. But I'm just grateful to not have to do that option now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if what we have today was available 15, 20 years ago, my life today would be very different. But, I found that this plant was really effective and beneficial for me, and have really tried to champion and educate. So the reason that we're here today is the endocannabinoid system. And as I've kind of touched on already, it's responsible for regulating every other system throughout the body, um, whether it's mood with serotonin modulation, stress, um, memory with acetylcholine, memory and appetite with modulation of acetylcholine, um, helping to regulate inflammation through cytokine response, pain with regulation of glutamate and dopamine and GABA, and all the things that there is a single pharmaceutical compound to regulate, which might have, you try to regulate something with a single molecular compound, and that might throw other systems off. The endocannabinoid system knows how to regulate and then also regulate those downline. So you don't see as much of the way of side effects as you might with a pharmaceutical. This chart kind of shows that the endocannabinoid system is responding to receptors throughout the body. It really isn't just in one place, again, which is why this seems to be so effective for so many different things. It's not just going to the brain or and causing intoxicating effects, or just going to the gut and increasing appetite. It's going anywhere it can go, any system, again, that can be over or understimulated. That's what this is monitoring. So what are these compounds, and why are we using this plant for them? The compounds in the plant, which are called phytocannabinoids, are chemically very comparable to what are called endocannabinoids. And endocannabinoids are our body's, again, way of regulating itself. There's not a store of endocannabinoids. They are something that is produced on demand. So if there's a trauma, if there's an overstimulation or an understimulation, our body produces these endocannabinoids. But as I was mentioning, oftentimes our body can't produce enough to keep up with our levels of pain, our levels of anxiety, our levels of trauma. And so we can use the phytocannabinoids from the cannabis plant to really supplement our body and our system. And in a way, I've started to think of these compounds as a vitamin. We're supplementing how our body is naturally regulating itself. There are a lot of different cannabinoids that the plant, phytocannabinoids that are produced in the plant. As of now, there's about 140 that have been identified, with many more on the way. CBGA is the first cannabinoid that's produced in the cannabis plant. Enzymatically, that can then turn into CBD, CBC, THC. And then there's whole processes of oxidizing, degradation, and processing within the plant, where you can get variants, and that's where you see the CBGV and the THCV. The V is for variant, which has a different chemical chain. So again, the cannabis plant is producing not just a multitude of different cannabinoids, but also essential oils called terpenes. So one plant could have hundreds of molecules in it. And that's why you hear people talk about strain. I try not to use the word strain. I like varietal more. You'll hear people talking about how this plant or an ingestible product was so profoundly beneficial. And that's because, unlike a pharmaceutical where they're focusing on one singular molecule, the plant is producing all of these synergistic compounds that are much more effective together than a singular compound can be.
And as we're learning more about our endocannabinoid system, or ECS, some of the things that like a runner's high that used to be credited to endorphins, more and more scientists are saying, no, that's likely a large part of endocannabinoids being produced by the body. So if
Absolutely.
anybody, on the call are athletes and appreciate that tremendous feeling that makes you want to run again, despite the pain, that's endocannabinoids. And so once again, it's why our body recognizes phytocannabinoids, because it's so chemically similar that it's not seen as an outsider, or some kind of medicine that's foreign to the body. And also, which Matthew will talk about, is why the safety profile is so tremendous, and why there's no true LD50 for cannabis.
Absolutely. To go back here for just 1 second, something that I think is very interesting for endocannabinoids, one of the most abundant sources of endocannabinoids is actually breast milk. In a recent study, they found that newborns produce an endocannabinoid called 2-AG, which is this complex guy down here. They produce 2-AG, and that promotes the latching and suckling. And then breast milk will also have the 2-AG in it, which kind of promotes that, which will promote that. So again, these are very important compounds to development and to the proper function of the human body.
And that's so interesting because, people theorize, well, that's because a quiet baby is a safe baby. Back in the day, if you're in nature where we used to have natural predators, if your baby's quiet, it's a safer baby. So it's great that, after the baby feeds, it naps and is at ease and that sort of thing. So
A lot of people will talk about a baby. I don't have children myself, but a lot of people will talk about babies being milk drunk. It might be a little bit more that they're milk high. There are several synthetic cannabinoids, and some of them are even available as pharmaceuticals on the market. One case that I do really like to talk about is something called Marinol. Marinol is a synthetic analog of THC. It was, I believe, released in the 80s, and to me it kind of seemed as an appeasement, where the government said, okay, THC is the active compound of the cannabis plant. You want to use it for cancer and AIDS and wasting syndromes and pain. Here's this synthetic THC analog. What they found is it's very poorly tolerated. Most people that take it don't enjoy it. There's almost a 0% rate of abuse, which is very interesting, because if THC is the active intoxicating compound or medicinal compound, why wouldn't the synthetic analog of THC be more common, or be the end all be all? And that's again because there's so much more in this plant than just THC, then CBD, then just CBG. It's this combination of all these different compounds that are working together that make this plant as effective as it can be. There's even compounds that, flavonoids are in 5 years are going to be what we're talking about, and all these other compounds from the plant that are very exciting.
And people were really excited about Epidiolex, which was actually developed by Dr. Ethan Russo, who's a Washington resident, and GW Pharma. It's a CBD product approved by the FDA. The problem is if you have a regular prescription for it, it can cost you upwards of $10,000 a year. So, like a lot of pharmaceuticals, there's the plus side and then there's the asterisk. So, Epidiolex is nice to have the FDA approval, but that's not the whole story.
Absolutely. So there are, as I showed in the previous slides, there are a lot of different receptors that that cannabinoids interact with. The valenoid receptors, TRPV1, G-coupled protein receptors, GPR55, cytokine response. The two primary receptors that we are learning about are called CB1 and CB2, cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2. CB1 is found primarily within the central nervous system, the brain, the spine, the gut, nerve endings. CB2 is found primarily in the organs, in the immune system, in the peripheries. The intoxicating effects of cannabis come from when the CB1 receptors are stimulated. In small amounts, that can be really effective and beneficial in regulating neurotransmitters, in regulating appetite response, nerve endings, pain signalings. It's when you consume more THC or other CB1 agonists that you're getting an overstimulation, and that's really what we perceive as the intoxicating effects. CBD and CBG don't stimulate the CB1 receptor, so you do not get the intoxication or impairment from those compounds. They're more interacting and regulating the CB2 receptors, so you get immune response, anti-inflammatory benefit, versus intoxication and impairment.
And of course, we also have opioid receptors in our body, but I think our body's telling us something when we know that there are 10 times as many as cannabinoid receptors in our body as opioid receptors. So, the plant is 28 million years old, they theorize. So it's likely that, we evolved right alongside it.
Absolutely. This is a very rudimentary kind of understanding of how the cannabinoids interact with the receptors. Again, the THC fits in neatly to the CB1 receptors. Other compounds fit in neatly to the CB2 receptors. CBD works a little bit more indirectly, and they're still kind of figuring out the specific mechanisms of action of CBD. But again, these are all modulatory things, either agonists or antagonists or inverse agonists. And again, depending on which cannabinoid you're using, that's going to stimulate a receptor in a different way to give you a different effect and benefit. So if you were to go today into most cannabis dispensaries, primarily what they're selling is high THC products. We're doing our best to get as much CBD and CBG into the market as we can, but most people, I believe, aren't really using the plants as effectively and beneficially as they can by overstimulating those CB1 receptors for those intoxicating effects, more than you can get a wellness benefit from using microdosing, or what I like to call intentional cannabis use, where you're using enough to get a benefit and relief, but you're really staying below that intoxicating threshold. A little bit of the science that I think is really fascinating is cannabinoids actually travel backwards throughout your nervous system. So your body sends signals from a presynaptic neuron to a postsynaptic neuron, and that tells your body to do everything. It lets you know that there's pain. It lets you know it's just how our bodies function. What's really interesting about cannabinoids is that they actually travel from the postsynaptic neuron to the presynaptic neuron, where they can detect overstimulation. So I think pain is a really good example. Our body produces something called glutamate. It lets us know that there's something wrong. It's your body's way of telling you that there is an issue. I know I have herniated discs in my back. I don't need the constant reminder that we experience as pain. So when I use an intentional amount of CBD or CBG, what is happening is the cannabinoids are traveling from the postsynaptic neuron. They're detecting that overstimulation from glutamate and releasing through calcium ion channels. They're inhibiting that glutamate response. It's not going to put the herniated discs in my back into place, but if it can inhibit that pain response so that I'm not constantly experiencing the pain, then I can live my life better. And this happens with a whole host of neurotransmitters: serotonin, GABA, glutamate, and dopamine, and again, just kind of helps to modulate that neurotransmitter response. If we really want to dive deep, these are all the different cannabinoids and the receptors that they're interacting with. So here we see for anxiety, not only is it interacting with that CB1 receptor, but also serotonin receptors through the all these different receptors, all these different cannabinoids, which is why when you isolate and have synthetic compounds, or you are just using THC or like Marinol, the synthetic analog of THC, you're not getting the full benefit of the plant because you're missing out on all of these different responses and interactions.
And how egotistical of us as humans to think that somebody with 30 years of chemistry experience could take a plant that's 28 million years old and say, that's the one piece that is beneficial, and we'll throw away the rest, or we'll disregard the rest. So like Matthew pointed out, there's so much more that we're learning about cannabis, and so much more we will know about cannabis in just the next few years. But we do know from a tremendous amount of study and a tremendous amount of self-initiated human tests, people who have used cannabis and hemp, we know that it's tremendously safe. So that's the good news.
Absolutely. Trey was talking about the LD50 of cannabis, and essentially you would have to consume so much cannabis for it to have a toxic overdose that you physically couldn't, and the only way for it to actually be dangerous is if you were crushed by that amount of cannabis. Again, all the different cannabinoids and all their potential interactions and benefits. So again, we really tout that our Revida products are made with a full spectrum, full plant oil, where even though it is going to be CBD and CBG dominant, there are small amounts of all these other compounds. CBC is a very exciting compound and will probably be the next one utilized. And they're finding that that might even be 10 times more effective as CBD is. So again, we're very much at the forefront of what's happening, but we are still very much in the infancy as well. And this is going to continue to grow and evolve and just continue to get better. This is something that, as good as it is for patients to use, it is also something that caregivers can think about using as well. Caregivers are also going through very traumatic experiences and dealing with a lot of the same stress and anxiety as the person that they're giving care to. So this is something that can also help them to modulate and regulate those stress responses, help to regulate circadian rhythm and maybe get a better night's sleep. And again, it's safe with very little possibility of having side effects or negative interactions. Optimal dosing on cannabinoid therapies is very unique to the individual. It's not like certain things where it's directly height weight proportional. My cannabis and cannabinoid use fluctuates daily. There are certain days where there's about a month a year where the weather and the pressure in the air is awful, and my injuries are almost unbearable. And I can use 10 times higher levels of CBD, CBG, THC than I do on a day like today, where my pain is very minimal. A little bit of anxiety from doing this presentation, but that's okay. So on a day where my stress, anxiety, pain are very low, my dosage is also very low. On a day where my pain is much higher, my dosages are going to be much higher. But unlike a lot of other things, it's not like I will experience a withdrawal if I fluctuate my dosage. It works very quickly and is in and out of the system relatively quickly. So I can use one of our tinctures, get effects and benefits within 30 to 45 minutes. And after 6 to 8 hours, the effects have kind of worn off. So if after the 6 to 8 hours, my pain levels are lower, I can use a smaller dose. I might not need to use any dose after that initial serving. So we always advocate start low, go slow, figure out what that lowest effective dose is, and build up as needed if needed. You can always take more, but you cannot take less. We also produce several different methods of consumption. We have tinctures, capsules, topicals. These are products that can be stacked with each other very successfully. A tincture is going to have a faster onset, but a capsule, even though it might take longer to work, might last longer. So some people may take a tincture under the tongue and have it absorb into the buccal tissue, where you get the effects relatively quickly, at the same time as they take a capsule, which has to be processed through the liver, which might take 2 hours to start working, but might also last significantly longer. Topicals are also great for topical application and more location-specific pain. I know for the herniated discs in my back, there's too much meat, muscle, and tissue for that topical to really penetrate effectively. But for my dislocated shoulder pain, car accident, I'm a mess. But the topicals work really well on my shoulder where that issue is a little bit closer to the surface. So again, kind of stacking these different modalities, having them available can be really effective and beneficial depending on the severity of the issue somebody's dealing with, the location, and again, if that fluctuates, having these different products available can be very effective. Our products initially have been geared towards cancer patients, hospice care, palliative care. So we do have some of the most concentrated, highest dosage products available on the market. And take our level 5, 6,000 milligram tincture, for example. We haven't seen another 6,000 milligram tincture that is as concentrated as ours. So that is amazing if somebody is experiencing very severe pain, very high levels of pain, anxiety, sleep issues as they're dealing with something as severe and traumatic as cancer or end-of-life care. The average person doesn't need 200 milligrams in a serving, though, and they can get this very high dose tincture for a relatively affordable price and just use very low concentrations of it and get a significant amount of servings out of it. We also have, all the way down to 300 milligram tinctures, which work really well for just kind of supplementation. If someone just wants to take 10 milligrams of CBD a day, if that's what they find is an effective dose for them, they can get our 300 milligram tincture, and that bottle is still going to last a full month for them. Or again, these higher dosage products, which are very concentrated and you could take very small amounts of to get an effective therapeutic dose. I know that I've said a lot in the last 30 to 45 minutes. So now if anyone has any questions, I very much, we're here for you and to make sure that we answer all of your questions.
And I'm sorry,
Hi,
I can't.
Matthew. It's Amanda here. I have a question, or would like to have you talk a little bit in regards to the antiviral properties of it, especially for staph and just antiviral in general.
Absolutely. One of the things that's very, of the multitude of things that this plant can do, is they're finding that it's antibacterial. The plant produces these compounds as the plant's immune system. We're able to benefit from these compounds, but the plant is producing CBG is a very powerful antimicrobial, antibacterial compound. They're finding that it's very effective in dealing with MRSA, which is becoming antibiotic resistant. So I believe that in the future we will see phytocannabinoids in hospital settings for cleanliness and sterilization, where this is going to be very effective and beneficial for dealing with MRSA and staph and these other very serious compounds that are becoming resistant to our traditional antibacterial compounds.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you for bringing up MRSA. That's it's the bane of hospitals and wrestlers and other people, high contact sports. So I'm hoping too, not only hospitals, but wrestling mats all over the country one day can be treated with something that's less rough on the skin and less dangerous than bleach and some of the other products that are being used.
Absolutely. And in terms of its antiviral properties, again, that modulation of the immune system with CBD and other cannabinoids can be very effective. I don't want to speak too specifically, but there are studies that are happening now, and we'll learn a little bit more about the specific cannabinoids and mechanisms of action. But I've personally seen this plant work very well for people dealing with autoimmune disease. And at the beginning of COVID, when there was a shortage on hand sanitizer, a lot of the cannabis companies in Washington, they use very high proof alcohol for sterilization, for extraction. So we saw several different cannabis companies come out with hand sanitizers that were supplemented with cannabinoids and terpenes. And, there is a potential added benefit when you're using these compounds and killing different bacteria. There goes my light.
I also wanted to tell you guys, this is Amanda again. I also wanted to share with you guys a personal story, because we all know that having one-on-one personal stories help with understanding the need for the products out there and why they're important to utilize. But I personally had knee surgery about 2 weeks ago. And as I shared with both of these gentlemen, I was able to get off of the pain medicine pretty quickly and move over to just the 6,000 milligrams of the CBD. And I would take 1 syringe full, 1 mil I would do it 3 times a day. So about every 6 hours or so. And it was fantastic. I didn't need anything. My doctor's impressed that after knee surgery, I can do crisscross applesauce like nobody's business. And he's like, nobody at 40 can normally do this. You bounce back really fast. And I swear to you, it is because of your CBD, the Revida CBD.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's exact. Sorry, I'll let you go ahead, Trey.
No, go ahead, Matthew.
That's exactly why we do what we do. I personally worked in one of Washington's only medical cannabis dispensaries for about 5 years, which is where I met Mary and Dr. Sunil Agarwal. And when I left, I looked at my sales. I had done 35,000 individual transactions, and that was 35,000 different reports on people using this for everything. And the feedback and response that I would get from it was so profound that I've really dedicated my life to this. I've used this plant and found amazing benefit from it personally. But when you are working with people, and some of them I worked with for the 5 years that I was there, and I would see people be able to move away from their pharmaceuticals, or we were often the last place people would end up, but we were able to have the most profound effect and benefit. And while I would never tell anyone to change their pharmaceutical regimen or do something that their doctors didn't tell them to do, when people would come to us, or even like as Amanda was saying, come to us before surgery and not want to use those opioids or more traditional pain management therapies, we were able to help those individuals navigate the very complex marketplace and usage of these different products, and again, like Amanda was saying, help them to bounce back faster and heal faster and deal with all that inflammation, help them deal with their pain levels much more safely and effectively, again, often than with traditional pain management routes.
And although I'm not recommending this product specifically for pets, I got to tell you, 4 years ago, our senior dog had a massive stroke, and the veterinarian knew what I did for a living, and he said, you might have something better for her than I have. He said her brain is swollen and it will kill her if we can't get the swelling down. And it was, thanks to a whole plant extract that we not only brought the swelling down, but prevented any brain damage. And she went on to live another year and a half without any noticeable side effects of that attack or that incident. And then, and our dog this year had a major surgery, and we were able to, with the help of CBD, help keep her off of some of the recommended pain pills without causing her any pain. I wouldn't have allowed that. But, we were able to cut back on that other stuff in pretty short order. So, for me, it's about your loved ones, and that means the furry ones too. So I hope that, people on the call will consider cannabinoid medicine for their pets as well. Once again, looking for something that's specifically pet formulated, but every animal with a spine has an endocannabinoid system, and even some lower animals as well. So it's just it's good to know. I just wish we as a community of people had this science available to us sooner.
Matthew, we get a lot of questions in regards to cleanliness, cross-contamination, and so
Absolutely.
on. Could you speak a little bit about that? And also, because we're known as having a lot of information on being gluten-free and celiac disease. A lot of times hemp can be crossbred with wheat in the fields to help strengthen the crops. So could you talk a little bit about that as well?
I am not familiar. Cannabis is cannabis. I am not familiar or aware with it being crossed with wheat or anything else. So it is certainly gluten-free, and our products are just a hemp seed oil with the cannabis in them, very specifically designed and formulated not to have anything extra. We even remove the terpenes, the essential oils from the plant, to minimize any interactions that they might have. So our products are tested at multiple stages throughout the processing and extraction phase, and testing before a product is ever sent out into the market. We do test for, heavy metals, mycotoxins, all the contaminants that one might be worried about in a product like this. I could see there being interactions for celiacs with some of the other things that one might find in a tincture or a capsule, and some of those additives, which might have an interaction. But our products, again, are very clean and very intentionally formulated, so that there's nothing that doesn't need to be in there to minimize any kind of interaction. So
Great.
again, we yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that. I appreciate that. We get asked a lot about that, and the product is organic as well, correct?
It can't be certified as federally organic, and that's just a federal distinction.
Hmm.
But we only work with farmers. What I like to say is, if they could be, they would be. And as the laws change here, that is something that will also change, where you will see that federal organic distinction. So what the cannabis industry has had to do is really make their own standards, until the federal government steps in and I don't grows up a little bit. I don't want to get too much into that. But so that's again one of the reasons why you don't just want to get CBD from the gas station or even Whole Foods, and be very intentional about your cannabinoid products even online, because there's not a lot of there's not a company that I found that is like ours, that has the medical advisory board and a team like Trey and I, who are just specifically educators. We are wholly focused on producing the highest quality cannabis product in the world. I mean, it is what we're going for, and we really have the team behind us, on the cannabis therapeutic side, with extraction and processing, with our medical advisory board and the Ames Institute, with the research and the formulations. There just really isn't another company that has gone to the levels that we've gone to make sure that we have the cleanest, purest, highest quality, most data-driven products available in the world, realistically.
And are those clinicals and the research that's being done currently, is that something that will be available to our customers as well as it becomes published?
Absolutely. I mean, again, if you go to PubMed, you can research cannabinoids for any disease, and at some point there's either been a clinical or animal study done with cannabis for specific diseases. A lot of that is coming out of Europe, and Israel, but as testing opens up in the United States, again, there are college courses that are being developed around cannabis and cannabinoid therapy. So while we're very much at the forefront and infancy of this, it's going to grow exponentially, the knowledge, the research, the use of different cannabinoids, and it will get to a point where we're able to do a biological test on an individual and see what they're dealing with and figure out a very specific formulation of lesser and minor cannabinoids for what their needs are.
And anybody interested in looking at the research that's currently going on, clinicaltrials.gov is a great resource as well. You know, we know a lot of times research that's going on today might take 20 years to be realized in practice. So anybody who really wants to kind of have a sight into the future, sort of, clinicaltrials.gov is a great resource as well.
And with you guys, I'm a firm believer that they will start testing cannabinoids like you would test for your ferritin levels, and start finding that that is underlying cause of a lot of autoimmune issues and a lot of cancer. And once you start supplementing, then things start to change.
Absolutely. Dr. Russo, who we mentioned earlier, who's a Washington resident and lives on Vashon, that's his theory, is that there's actually a endocannabinoid deficiency that some people suffer from. And he points out the comorbidity between migraines, fibromyalgia, and conditions like IBS might be related and strongly tied to an endocannabinoid deficiency based on his experience as a physician. So, you know, for people who suffer from not just one, but maybe two or three of those concurrent conditions, we really hope that's the case, and you know, a lot of people are going to find relief.
I couldn't agree with you more. So one last thing I'd like you guys to touch on is the use of this in kids. I know that we've asked you to come back and do a presentation on using CBD with children, but just that this is something, because we get asked frequently about it being safe in low doses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, as I emphasized earlier, breast milk is one of the most abundant sources of endocannabinoids. Um, and as they are doing more testing on it, um, they're finding that it seems to be very important in natural development. Um, I working at the medical dispensary that I worked in. We were one of the few dispensaries in Washington where we did work with juvenile population and the under 18 population. And I think that people need to really separate high THC recreational intoxication versus cannabinoid supplementation. Um, we would see at the beginning of school years, there were a lot of parents where if the alternative was putting their kids on ADD, ADHD medication, well, cannabinoids can also regulate very similar systems to what those traditional medications can. We wouldn't, anyone under 21, of course, needed a doctor's authorization. So it isn't something where kids were just coming in off the street, but we're going and working with their doctor, and we're coming in and working with us and coming up with very intentional usage for very specific use cases. I believe the youngest person that we helped was an 18-month-old with leukemia.
Oh,
And you know, he's now 5 or 6 years old and doing great. But within we helped him for years. Within 7 days of him coming into our store, he was off of his pain medication and had an appetite again. And to this day, that's something that still gives me chills. Is one of the best things I've done with my life. And I won't say that that cured anything, but if we can help to make that easier and to help to strengthen the body so that maybe it can deal with some of these more traumatic situations, I do personally believe that it's in terms of harm reduction, it's probably better than using many of the pharmaceuticals in terms of side effects and long-term effects. It's not, it is something that I would say if somebody is wanting to use this for their children, to work with a doctor and make sure that that's going to be the best thing for their child. I'll move on to the next slide here.
And if I could add to that, Matthew,
Yeah, of course.
work with, if you find your doctor is not willing or capable of having this conversation, that's not uncommon. Most doctors didn't have this experience in med school, but certainly living in Washington, we are blessed to be surrounded by very capable physicians who do know. And so if your physician is not able to have that conversation, please don't let it die there. Please engage with somebody like Mary Brown, who, you know, we can help you connect with people like that.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think really sets us apart, is it's not just me sitting here giving anecdotal evidence. We have our medical advisory board with the Ames Institute and Mary Brown, with Simply Mary Jane Consulting, who can answer these questions, who can delve deeper and work on a personal level with an individual to really cater and figure out a plan that's going to be the most effective for an individual. Again, it's your body produces these compounds naturally. So I think that supplementing with proper amounts of cannabinoids like CBD and CBG isn't a dangerous thing. I certainly wouldn't recommend, you know, a 6-year-old start smoking high THC cannabis for developmental issues. That is probably less than ideal. But for a child that has very severe PTSD, something like high levels of THC might actually be effective and beneficial. One of the few studies that has been done on endocannabinoid function was done on PTSD in survivors of 9/11, where they actually found that they had less CB1 receptors and were having, and that system wasn't functioning as optimally. And I firsthand have worked with many people with PTSD, veterans, police officers, you know, a lot of people who weren't allowed to use cannabis during their professional career, who found that versus what they had been prescribed, that the cannabis was significantly more effective. Again, I would never tell anyone to do something other than what their doctor has told them to do. But there is new evidence, there are new therapies and protocols which might be more effective.
I
And of
appreciate you
course,
sharing that story, Matthew. That, I mean, that brought tears to my eyes about that little boy. So thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that. And
Yeah,
we
I
look
mean,
forward to that upcoming webinar that we've to schedule, because that I think that there's a big need for that. And I think a lot of doctors get asked and they don't know how to respond.
absolutely. And that's, you know, that's what we're here for. And that was one of the amazing things working at the dispensary that I did. You know, I'm certified through the Washington State Department of Health as a medical cannabis consultant, allows me to answer more questions and dive a little bit deeper than if you were to just go into a recreational store where their emphasis is intoxication. But there were certainly points where, you know, I would say that this is getting to a level where you need to discuss this with a doctor, your doctor, or we can recommend, again, go talk to them at the Ames Institute and go talk to Mary Brown, who can answer these questions and delve a little bit deeper. All right.
Thank you guys so much for your time today. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off,
Yeah.
Matthew.
Again, we are here for you. We're here to educate and to make sure that everyone is getting the most out of these products. We are always happy to offer continuing education. We are happy to do as many of these events as is going to be helpful for you, your patients, your customers. And again, that is really at the forefront of what we do, and one of the many things that I think sets us apart in the industry.
No, and we appreciate that about you guys. We are very much based on education, and that's how we promote brands, and your company's plan and business model aligns perfectly with ours. So, which is why I stand behind the product and helped pick you guys and said, yes, let's do this. So
We appreciate that. And you guys as well. We're always looking for partners that, like, as you said, that share our ideals and values. And I think that's kind of the way forward in business.